Jason Fung, nephrologist and best-selling author, shares his experiences utilizing an individualized approach to fasting to successfully treat thousands of overweight, metabolically ill, and diabetic patients, and why being a doctor who specializes in kidney disease gives him a unique insight into early indications of metabolic disease. Let's listen to Dr. Jason Fung.
I don't eat breakfast a lot of the days of the week. So when I have something at lunchtime, then I'll often just keep working. And once you get used to it, it's really not very difficult because your body will simply take the calories it needs from your stores of energy, which is your body fat, and the glycogen, which is stored away. So it's a completely natural process. And when there's time, then I go and eat, and it makes it so much easier. You don't have to obsess all the time about, oh, I don't have time, what can I eat? And then you wind up going to the local donut store, and then, oh, there's just muffins. So then you eat muffins, and you know that that's not good for you, but then you feel this pressure to eat. There's all this pressure on people. Oh, you're not hungry, but you must eat. And it's like, well, eating when you're not hungry is not a great weight loss strategy. If you look at what happens when you wake up, it's very interesting because there is a counter-regulatory surge, which happens just before you wake up. So somewhere around 4:30 a.m., your body releases certain hormones, which are counter-regulatory hormones. That is, they run counter to insulin. So these are the sympathetic nervous system gets activated, growth hormone, noradrenaline, for example. So these all spike just before you wake up. And the whole point of it is that they are actually activating your body for the day ahead. And one of the things that these counter-regulatory hormones do is they stimulate your liver to pump out some glucose. So in fact, you don't have to eat to get ready for the day. Your body's already done that for you. If you start to eat, well, that's fine. If you like to eat breakfast, it's fine, but you don't have to. Lots of different cultures have done all kinds of different eating regimens throughout history, and people have done well on all different ones. So some eat early, some eat late. If you look at, for example, circadian rhythm of hunger, I actually think that's very interesting, because if you take people and simply measure their hunger over 24 hours, there is a tendency to go in certain patterns. And the rhythm is that your hunger is actually lowest at somewhere around 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. So again, and that's because of the counter-regulatory surge. And the fact is that the hormones is what determines your hunger, because 8 a.m. is usually the longest period before you've eaten, because you've often not eaten all night. So it may be 12, 14 hours since you've eaten, yet your hunger is actually the lowest that it is through the day. So again, that's why a lot of children don't feel like eating breakfast and so on. And the only reason they start eating breakfast is that we force them and we tell them that you got to eat breakfast, you got to eat breakfast, got to eat breakfast. And it's okay if you want to eat breakfast, but what you want to avoid is eating all this processed, sort of highly refined foods that are so convenient and have taken over the breakfast aisle, so to speak, because they're so easy. We can grab them and go. Muffins and donuts and all these Pop-Tarts, all these sort of things that are super unhealthy for us because we don't want to cook bacon and eggs in the morning. It's like, who's got time for that? You got to cook, clean, eat, all this sort of stuff. Right. So even if you look at the circadian rhythm, if you're the least hungry at 8 a.m., why would you force yourself to eat? It doesn't make any sense. It's based on people who have said that, it's going to keep you full throughout the day. It's going to boost your metabolism. The data behind those claims is very, very sketchy. People get browbeaten into, you must eat, you must eat, you must eat. It's like, no, there's lots of different options. You can eat if you want, and you can make it work for you. And if you're really not hungry at breakfast and you don't want to eat and you want to rush out the door to get to work and get to school, yes, you can just skip it and go to lunchtime. It's okay. What's interesting is the very word itself, breakfast. It's the meal that breaks your fast. It's not you must eat as soon as you wake up before your feet hit the ground sort of thing. You can break your fast at any point. You can break it at 8 a.m. You could break it at 11 a.m. It makes no difference. And the other thing that's very interesting about the word is that what it implies is that you actually have to fast in order to be able to break your fast. So what this tells us is that it's part of the natural cycle of life. You have to eat, but you have to fast. Fasting is merely the absence of eating. So if you have a period of time, that's when you eat, and you have a period of time where you should
Mm-hmm.
fast. You
Right.
don't eat all the time. That's
Right.
not a good weight loss strategy either. Yet we
Yeah.
get told again and again, oh, before your feet hit the ground, you got to start shoving food in your mouth. And then, oh, you have to eat all the way up until you go to bed. 6 or 7, 8, 9, 10 meals in the day. Oh, that's going to make you healthy. Where's your period of fast? So this was described by a lot of the physiologists, and many of these studies are very old. And it basically is a process of moving from storage of food energy to burning food energy. So what happens is that when you eat, insulin goes up, and insulin is a hormone which is essentially a nutrient sensor. So a lot of things other than just carbohydrates, a lot of proteins, for example, will also stimulate insulin. When you eat, the insulin goes up, and it tells your body that you need to store food energy because you're eating and you've got more food energy than you actually need. So some of
Right.
it goes to open up the cells to glucose, for example, and that's what we tend to think about for insulin, is that it lets the cells use the glucose. But the other thing it does is it stops lipolysis, which is the burning of fat, and glycogenolysis, which is the storage. So you store sugar in the form of glycogen in the liver. So glycogen is long chains of glucose. The liver packages them all together and stores it in the liver. And this is why you don't die when you go to sleep every single night, is because your body can store some of this food energy. So when you're not eating, it will bring it back out. Plants, for example, will link all these chains of glucose together as starches. So amylopectin, for example, there's amylopectin A, B, and C. So there's different forms of starches. So for example, white bread, white flour uses amylopectin A, and this is the wheat that puts all this glucose together. So that's what plants do. They use starch, and humans use glycogen, and lots
Mm-hmm.
of mammals use glycogen as well. But essentially, you can think of it as stored sugar because that's what it is. And the body has two storage forms of energy. It can store glycogen, and when that's full, you can't store anymore because the liver simply can't hold it. So your body then turns to storing fat, and this is the process of de novo lipogenesis. So de novo is a word from Latin, means from new. Lipogenesis, lipo means fat, genesis means the creation of. So it's the creation of new fat, but it's the creation of new fat from carbohydrates. Dietary fat doesn't actually do this. It actually just gets absorbed directly and goes into your fat cells. The excess carbohydrates, if you take a lot of carbohydrates, it gets turned into glycogen,
Mm-hmm.
it gets stored, and then body fat. So
Right.
they're two complementary storage systems because they fulfill different roles in the body. The glycogen is easily accessible. That is, the body can kind of move in and out of glycogen very easily, but there's a limited amount. Body fat is much harder to get at, but it has unlimited storage. So the analogy I sometimes use is it's kind of like a refrigerator and a basement freezer, like a chest freezer. The refrigerator, it's right there. It's easy to put food in. It's easy to take food out. But once you're full, you're full. The freezer in the basement has unlimited capacity. That is, you can put several freezers downstairs, but it's harder to get to. And that's how the body stores energy. As you stop to eat, so the process of fasting goes through several phases. So when you eat, insulin goes up, you store food energy in those various forms. You'll notice, of course, that protein is not stored as energy. If you eat a lot of protein, then your body uses some of that protein for building protein, but the excess actually just gets turned into glucose because it can't store
Mm-hmm.
that excess protein. So people who are pounding back, it's very hard from a dietary standpoint to eat a high protein diet. It tends to be very unpalatable. Yeah, natural foods, of course, are good, but it tends to when you're just eating there's a lot of fat in there as well. You just have those shakes and stuff, which is kind of pure protein. It's not that effective. It's not as effective as you think it would be. So you got to realize that the bodybuilders are actually breaking down a lot of muscle all the time because they're working out. They're breaking down the protein, so they may require more protein. So the first phase is the eating phase. Then you start to go into the fasting phase. So from about 0 to sort of 24 hours, what happens is that your insulin starts to fall. So the food that you eat is gone, and now you need to start pulling out energy. So you need to start pulling energy back out from the body in order to keep it working. So the first place it goes is the glycogen. So what you see is that your body continues to burn glucose up to about 24 hours. At about 24 hours, the glycogen stores run out, and there's a period of gluconeogenesis. So gluconeogenesis is, again, from the word gluco, meaning glucose, neo, which is new, genesis, creation of. So it's the creation of new glucose. It gets created from protein. So you will break down some protein and create glucose in order to feed the cells. You're ramping up fat oxidation at the same time, but that takes a little bit of time because, as I said, the fat stores are very large or can be very large, but they're difficult to get at. So it takes a bit of time. So in that 24 to 36 hours, you get this period where you're actually breaking down some protein. You're still living off the rest of your glycogen. And then that's it. After 36 hours, then you get the kind of fat oxidation starts to take over. So protein burning really drops to a minimal sort of turnover, and then the breakdown, and then you start to see the fat oxidation. So fatty acid levels go up in the blood, and you see fat in the blood. And basically the body lives off of stored fat from then on. This is just physiologically what happens when you stop eating. Right. There are ways to kind of hack the system, so to speak. So ketogenic diets, for example, will use very, very high fat diets in order to reduce serum insulin, because insulin's one of the sort of master hormones that controls where your energy is coming or going. So you have to understand that insulin is essentially a hormone that tells our body to store energy. When insulin is low, your body wants to burn energy, but you can't do both. And this is something that's very interesting, is that, and it makes sense, because if you're burning energy, you don't want to store it, and vice versa. So if insulin is high or it's low, the effects are completely opposite. When and there's something called the Randall cycle in physiology as well, which is that when your body is burning glucose, it's not burning fat, and when it's burning fat, it doesn't burn glucose. So they actually, and this is a system that is designed because you want to kind of use one fuel or the other and not both at the same time. It's not very efficient. So that's why there's this kind of sequential move from burning glucose at first and then fat. And that's how you kind of hack the system, because if you have super, super, super low carbohydrate intake, you essentially are just providing fat to the body. Obviously, there's some protein there, but mostly fat. So ketogenic diets, for example, are very, very high fat diets. And because it's mostly fat, your body turns into burning fat, which is why you get ketone production. So ketones, actually, most of the body doesn't use ketones. Most of the body directly uses fatty acids. So the triglycerides, so body fat is triglycerides. It's a glycerol backbone with 3 fatty acid chains. As you break those fatty acid chains off, muscles will use fat directly. The glycerol gets turned into glucose because certain tissues need glucose. The brain is one, but the brain uses way too much glucose. So in order to get the fuel into the brain, your body produces ketones, which can cross the blood-brain barrier and feed the brain, and that reduces the reliance on glucose. So that's where ketosis is. That's where ketogenic diets are, and that's how people kind of game the system to get where they want. Now, there's something called the glucose ketone ratios. So different people actually are quite different. It's interesting that as your glucose falls, you expect your ketones to go up, but that's not what happens in everybody. So some people actually don't bring up their ketones. And that's why some people get this sort of keto flu, or they don't feel so good when they're not adapted to that because their ketones don't respond normally. Most people will go back to it very quickly. But yeah, if you don't eat, that's a very fast way to get into ketosis if you want, for the large majority of people. The period from kind of 24 to 36 hours roughly where people are burning protein, that's where people get the misconception that, oh, you're going to lose muscle, you're going to burn muscle, you're going to burn muscle. And that's, if you're just to look at that, you might think that makes sense. But what they miss is that when you start refeeding, when you start eating again, growth hormone levels have gone way up. So again, remember that growth hormone is one of the counter-regulatory hormones.
Right.
So norepinephrine, growth hormone, the sympathetic nervous system all go up as your insulin goes down. So growth hormone is going up. So when you actually start to eat again, you are starting to rebuild all that lost protein. But it's actually better because what you've done is when you break down those protein, your body actually identifies the kind of old junky sort of proteins that it doesn't need, the cells that it doesn't need, and gets rid of them and then rebuilds new ones. So it's actually a complete renovation cycle as opposed to leaving that old protein where it is, because if you continually eat all the time, you don't have that breakdown. That breakdown is very important. In medicine, for example, for new bone, you don't simply have the bone just sticking around. There's actually a continual cycle of renewal, of breakdown and regeneration, and this is what the fasting does. It gives you that period of breakdown and regeneration. So if you look at studies of alternate daily fasting, for example, they've done studies where they've compared calorie restriction with alternate daily fasting. Over a period of 32 weeks, they've measured lean mass at the end of it. In fact, the calorie restriction people, their lean mass percentage went up by 0.5% because they had lost some weight. But the alternate daily fasting group went up by 2.2%. So in other words, the fasting group was 4 times better at preserving lean mass, which is directly contrary. Absolutely. And it's directly contrary. This is what's very interesting because you have studies of people who are growth hormone deficient, for example, older men. Some people, when they measure growth hormone and they're deficient, then when they replace them, they see this increase in lean mass, increase in bone mass, and all these sort of really beneficial things. So I think that that's what people miss when they just look at that period of gluconeogenesis when it's breaking down. They miss that period where you're rebuilding. Just like if you were to do a renovation, you have to tear stuff down first. You have to take down all the old cabinets before you put up new cabinets. So if you just look at the tear down, you say, oh, that's terrible. But you haven't looked at the full cycle of feast and fast, which is much more powerful. Growth hormone is a counter-regulatory hormone. So as you eat, insulin goes up, so growth hormone goes down. Nothing shuts down growth hormone secretion like eating. It's fascinating when they do these long fasts, 5 days and so on, the growth hormone levels just go way, way up. When you see the pattern of growth hormone secretion get this big spike in the beginning of the day, that during that period of longer fasting that most people have, that 12 to 14 hours where you don't eat, once you start to fast where you just don't eat anything at all, you start to see little spikes of growth hormone all throughout the day. So your body's actually trying to build and repair and so on. Obviously, if you fast forever, you'll die. But assuming that you eventually eat again and provide the nutrients that are needed, your body actually goes into that anabolic mode. So it is fascinating, and I wouldn't have thought of it logically either, but this is physiology. This is what happens. We know that nothing turns off growth hormone like eating. Fasting provides sort of a lot of different hormonal changes. There's changes in obviously insulin and norepinephrine and growth hormone, sympathetic nervous activation. This is one of the other things that people don't necessarily understand, is that if you think about what these hormones do, they actually activate the body. So sympathetic nervous system is the so-called fight or flight response. So the body's actually getting activated during this period of not eating. Norepinephrine or adrenaline, which is noradrenaline, is pumping up your body. It's not it's not shutting it down. And this is what they say, oh, you don't eat, you're going to go into starvation mode, your basal metabolic rate will go down. It's the complete opposite. When they say you'll go into starvation mode, they're actually not just wrong, they're like 100% wrong, because it actually activates. So people come back from fast and they go, whoa, I cannot believe how much energy I had. It's like, yeah, because your body is pumping you full of energy. And if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, for example, it makes total sense. If you are a hunter and a caveman and you don't eat for a couple of days and your body starts to shut down, you will never eat again. You have no energy to go out and hunt. You have no energy to catch those rabbits, whatever. So your body's simply not that stupid. What it does is it switches energy sources. So it says, okay, there's no more sugar. I can't burn any sugar. I've run through my glycogen. I need to switch to body fat. Not only am I going to switch to body fat, but I need to pump you up so that you can go out and hunt some woolly mammoth. Otherwise, I'm going to die. So that's what it does. So it actually burns fat, pumps you up, gives you more energy. And it's like, wow, that's exactly what you want to do, because the alternative is not viable. But these are physiologic responses. These are is not just kind of hocus pocus. You can measure these hormones, and you know what noradrenaline does. It pumps you up. When you measure people after prolonged fasting, their basal metabolic rate goes up. So, for example, a study I cited, which measured metabolic rate after 4 days of fasting, shows that when you measure the resting energy expenditure at the beginning and the end of the fast, it's about 10% higher at the end of those 4 days. So your body's not shutting down. It's actually being pumped up. So all this stuff about, oh, you should never skip this meal because you're going to go into starvation mode, they're completely wrong, because your body is pumping up, not shutting down. In fact, if you do calorie restriction, we know from study after study, all those studies on The Biggest Loser, for example, that if you simply try to reduce a few calories per day, so if you say, oh, I'm going to go from 2,000 calories to 1,600 calories per day, we know that your energy expenditure is going to go from 2,000 down to 1,600. You will for sure go into so-called starvation mode, but it's the calorie restriction that does that. Why? Because your body, remember, has two sources of energy. It has food and it has stored food or body fat. So if you keep eating, insulin is high, your body says, I need to store energy, but you only have 1,600 calories. Your body wants to burn 2,000, but it's only getting 1,600. Your insulin is high, so you can't store energy and burn energy. So you can't. So insulin is high, so your fat stores are locked away. You can't access those because you're still eating all the time.
Right.
And what it does is simply, I'm getting 1,600 calories in. I'm going to reduce my expenditure to 1,600. So you've gone down. The difference when you go down to zero, when it's about moving that insulin way down, is that all of a sudden you've unlocked all those stores of fat. The studies show is that almost all these attempts to simply restrict your calories. Now, insulin will go down because insulin goes down whenever you eat anything. Assuming your diet doesn't change much, but you eat a little less, your insulin will go down slightly. But it's not going down to like zero. Low carbohydrate ketogenic diets do a pretty good job also of bringing that insulin level down. Okay. And actually, you can lower the insulin levels even with a high carbohydrate diet. It's just that it's not sugar and refined grains.
Gotcha.
So there's lots of ways. There's a huge difference between beans, for example, and white bread. So they may be the same number of grams of carbohydrate, but the insulin effect, the glucose effect is hugely different. And you see that on the glycemic index. So therefore, if you look at some traditional societies, for example, they ate a very high carbohydrate diet, but their insulin levels were not bad. The key, of course, is that they're not eating sugar, they're not eating refined grains, and they're not eating all the time. So when you do that, you can tolerate these carbohydrate foods. So natural carbohydrate-containing foods, unprocessed sort of things, don't have nearly the insulin effect as our sort of refined, highly processed foods that we kind of eat in modern-day North America. So the Biggest Loser diet is really the same standard sort of eat less, move more advice that physicians and dietitians have given, but it's sort of that eat less, move more on steroids. It's eat a lot less and move a lot more. So their calorie restriction goes down to about, say, 1,200 calories, something like that. They don't want to be accused of starving their patients, which I think is ironic because I think if they went to zero, they'd have done a lot better. And their exercise goes way up because on the show you see them exercising and throwing up and all this kind of stuff. So it's essentially the same advice that people give, eat less, move more, but kind of jumbo sized. And what they show is that their metabolic rate just plummets. So they go from, as they lose weight, which they do in the short term, their metabolic rate also drops. And because their metabolic rate drops, they're feeling more tired, more cold, more hungry. And the worst part is that because they're burning less calories, even as they're eating less calories, their weight loss slows, eventually plateaus. So now your weight is not dropping, but you're burning 1,200 calories instead of 2,000. So your liver doesn't get enough energy. Your heart gets less energy. You're not generating body heat. You feel really crappy, and your weight is still down. So as you relax that, you start eating, say, 1,400 calories, but you're only burning 1,200. So that weight comes right back. So you see on that 6-year study that some people wound up like 50 pounds heavier than what I think it's about controlling insulin, not about controlling calories. So you can do it many different ways. There's paleo diets and so on. Intermittent fasting just happens to be one of the better studied ways to maintain your basal metabolic rate. So we know from our studies, from physiology studies, that this is what happens. So why don't we use our knowledge to tweak it? I mean, I don't say that everybody needs to fast or should fast. It's not easy. It's not fun. But why don't we let people use it as an option? It's if you don't eat, you're going to lose weight. That's not that hard to understand. What you have to understand too is that this is completely natural. And as physicians, when I talk to physicians always understand this point, because I say to them, well, we tell people that they should never, ever miss a meal. If you miss a meal, you're going to die. But we tell people to miss meals all the time. When they have surgery, you have to fast. When you do a colonoscopy, you have to fast. When you do fasting blood work, you have to fast. When you do an ultrasound, you have to fast. So there's all these situations where we actually tell people to fast. And guess what? Nothing bad happens. Everybody's normal. They might be hungry. They may be a little cranky, but that's about it. Nothing bad happens. So why can't we simply use that as a therapeutic tool to make people lose weight? Because these people have type 2 diabetes, they're obese, they're having heart attacks, they're having strokes. This is a serious problem to leave them at that level. The standard advice to eat less and move more doesn't work. We all know it, and the studies all show that it doesn't work. So why shouldn't we use this tool that we have, which is honestly the most powerful weight loss tool, because you cannot go lower than 0 calories. You can't go negative calories. So therefore, this is the most powerful tool, and we've decided to not use it. Like, are you kidding me? That's got to be the craziest thing I've ever heard. Everybody assumes that you can't do it because hunger will just build and build and build, and then it'll be intolerable. But that's not actually what happens. So you can look at the so-called hunger hormone ghrelin. And if you take somebody and you fast them, you can measure their ghrelin levels and see what happens. So in normal people, you get this 3 sort of spikes at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So clearly there's some element of learning involved because we expect to eat. It's 12 o'clock, we expect to eat. So our body kind of preempts us and expects it and puts out ghrelin. But what happens when you don't eat, when you skip that meal, is that the ghrelin does not continue to go up. It just falls back towards baseline. So that's really interesting because, again, when I speak to physicians, they all know this because we all, during our residency medical student days, we miss meals all the time. We're just way too busy, and you don't have 45 minutes to sit down at the cafeteria, so you skip lunch, and that's it. So you're a bit hungry during that hour, and then once it's faded, so at 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, you're a little bit hungry, but you're so busy, you just keep working. By 2 or 3 o'clock, you've forgotten that you didn't eat. And then sometimes you go, I wonder if I ate today, and you didn't. because the ghrelin has gone completely back to baseline. So over the day, these hunger actually comes in waves. And when people know that, they can plan for that. So I say, well, you know it's going to come. Prepare for it. Keep yourself busy. Have some tea, have some coffee, drink something, and let that wave just ride over you. Let it pass. And then by 2 or 3, it's done. And basically, what you've done is you've let your body eat lunch or dinner or whatever of your own body fat. And that's perfect. That's exactly what we wanted to do. And when you look at
Hmm.
multiple days of fasting, it's even more interesting because after about day 1, day 2, the hunger actually, the ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, peaks and then starts to go down. So this is exactly what we see in our clinic. So when we have people doing longer fasts, 5 days, 7 days, 14 days, everybody says, wow, how can you do that? And the secret is that after day 2, the hunger slowly fades. On day 2, you're like, wow, I will never get through this 7-day fast. On day 5, you're like, oh, I can go on forever. The hunger has completely disappeared
And it's
because now your body is just feeding you body fat constantly. The levels of body fat, the fatty acid levels are high. So your body's like, why do I need to eat? I have tons of fuel here because you've shifted fuel sources. So again, people always get the wrong idea. They think it's a one compartment problem where all the calories goes in one box and all comes out of one box. It's a two compartment problem. There's the food and there's the stored food. And what you've done is you've shifted your fuel to come out of the body fat. And now there's just so much of it that, and it's interesting because by day 5, day 6, and not everybody, but some people go, wow, I cannot believe how good I feel. It's like their energy level is way up because the noradrenaline, the sympathetic nervous system. I have no hunger at all. And a lot of people also note this sort of mental clarity, which has been remarked over and over again, how they think that they're much sharper, more clear. And it's like, wow, I feel amazing. And it's like, well, not everybody's going to be like that. But if people have this natural physiologic response and they do well, why don't we let them do it? And then they'll lose weight because if you don't eat for 7 days, you will lose weight. One of the things that I would warn people about, though, is about weight loss, is that there's a lot of water loss. And this is what people will tell you. The amount of weight loss, the amount of fat loss on a fasting is only averages half a pound of fat per day.
Okay.
Because a pound of fat is roughly 3,500 calories. So if you're eating normally 1,800, 2,000 calories, it'll take 2 days to burn 1 pound of fat. So on a 7-day fast, which sounds really extreme, you can expect to lose 3.5 pounds of fat. That's it. So if you have 100 pounds to lose and you say, wow, I'm expecting the 7-day fast to do a lot, you have 100 pounds to lose and you've lost 3.5. That's it. You will lose more because the rest of that is water. So you'll probably lose 7 pounds, 10 pounds even. But if you lose 10 pounds, 6.5 of that will come back, so that you're only 3.5 down at the end of the 7 days. And that's where people say, oh, you failed because look, you lost all that weight, but 7 pounds came back. Well, you should have expected that 7 pounds was going to come back. So you should never have expected that loss of water as it comes back. It's not a failure. It's basically to what to expect. And having the experience, when people understand this and expect it, then they don't feel so bad when this weight starts to go back up because you know that that's what's supposed to happen. I've never done a very extended fast because it simply doesn't fit into my schedule very easily. I have dinner with my family most of the time, so I do a lot of shorter fasts, the 24-hour fast. I have done a few. I'll tell you the reason I did them was that I went on a cruise. I gained a lot of weight because I wasn't watching what I was eating, and I made a decision that I wasn't going to watch what I eat, so I ate all kinds of crap, like ice cream and desserts and all that, and everybody knows. So I gained a ton of weight. My rings weren't fitting, and it's like, okay, this is not good. So then I went on a kind of longer fast. I think it was about 3 days. And I'll tell you, at the end of I did 3 days. Then I went kind of alternate daily fasting. By the next week, my weight was down to where it normally was. But I had a great time for that week. I ate a lot of food that I don't normally eat. And I think that was probably the longest I did because I was starting to get a little worried with, when the rings weren't fitting and my pants weren't fitting properly and so on. Right. It was all the carbohydrates, right? I'm not used to that high a carbohydrate intake. But again, that's as long as I've gone. How long you have to go is unknown. So there isn't very much research into it. If you talk to some of the people who have done these longer ones, they'll often say 5 days, 7 days. I'm not sure. I really don't know. You can get a lot of the autophagy, cellular kind of, what you want to do is get into that kind of 24, 36 hours where you're breaking down protein, because that's where you're kind of getting that renewal cycle, the breakdown of the protein and then the regrowth. And you can get a lot of those benefits by 24, 36 hours. So I tend to do quite a few of those. Almost every day I come in and I see somebody who's completely off of their diabetic medications and so on. One of the reasons we push some of the longer fasts is that these people are very sick. That is, we can do this in a controlled manner. That is, I can monitor them as a doctor. We have blood work. We have somebody that they can call if they have problems. We tell them to stop if there's so it's a controlled situation. But the thing is that these are very, very high risk people. If you don't do anything, they will develop a lot of different diseases: heart attacks, strokes, kidney disease, eye disease, amputations, all kinds of things. So the rewards are much higher. So we will push the envelope a little bit more for these patients. Now, you can also do very well with shorter intermittent fasting, but it takes longer. It's simply not as powerful as doing an extended fast.
Yeah.
But again, I would warn people that it is something that you have to adjust the medications, because you can't take the same dose of insulin, for example, and not eat. Your blood sugar will plummet, and you have to do it in a safe manner, which we try to do. But yes, you have to understand that type 2 diabetes, which is sort of very near and dear to my heart, because that's the majority of patients that I treat are type 2 diabetes. And what we see is that when you put people on very low carbohydrate diets, when you use intermittent fasting, you can actually reverse the disease, because their blood sugars will come down. You'll take them off all their medications. And that's completely opposite to the message that comes out from the American Diabetes Association, most doctors, which is that, oh, hey, type 2 diabetes is chronic and progressive. You've got it. You got it for life, buddy. That's the message that comes out. But it's not true, because we all know that as you lose weight, that diabetes goes away. So you have to be able to make them lose weight. But instead of that, the doctors, such as what I used to do, instead of really working hard to make them lose weight so that their disease gets better, we would simply pump them full of medications. And I was guilty of that as much as anybody else. But I understood eventually that these people were not getting healthier. They were getting heart attacks, they were getting strokes, they were getting kidney disease, which is where I come in, and they weren't getting better.
Yeah.
Now I see their diabetes kind of melting away. Now, again, it's not everybody. Not everybody's going to do well with a fasting diet. We're all individuals. Some people do very well with low carb diets. Some people sort of wild diet or paleo diets. You got to find out what works for you. But what my main message is that these are options for people. Don't take away those options of fasting, intermittent fasting, extended fasting, because some people will do extremely well on those. Other people they'll do terribly and they'll hate it. And I say, well, if it's not working and you hate it, don't do it. Do something else. But for those people who do very well, hey, this is beautiful. Yeah, refeeding syndrome is actually something slightly different. So during extended fast, what you can sometimes happen, and this was described more in sort of extreme prisoners of war in World War II, for example. When you start to eat, insulin goes up. But because you're very malnourished at the beginning, phosphorus levels in the blood actually plummet. So all the phosphorus is going back into the cell due to the high insulin load of the food. And it gets so low that you can get heart arrhythmias and people have died, for example. So if you look at the risk factors for refeeding syndrome, it's sort of more extended fasting, 5 days and beyond, but also a baseline level of malnutrition. That is, people who are truly starving, Holocaust victims, prisoners of war, that sort of thing. Key is to that people who are not in that sort of malnourished state are at fairly low risk of that. So again, these are people who would be, for example, 6 feet tall and 90 pounds. Like, they're so skinny, these prisoners of war. When you apply it to people on what I apply it to, they're 200, 300 pounds. The risk is very, very low. But you have to be aware that that is a potential risk and it's out there. The key is and from when they've treated them in the past. As I said, I've treated over 1,000 patients. I've never seen it, but then I'm not treating 90-pound people. I'm treating 390-pound people. So the risk is highly different, but you want to break the fast very slowly so that insulin doesn't go up. You want to try to avoid refined grains and sugar when you're refeeding. You want to go with more things such as proteins and so on, stuff with phosphorus, so meat and so on. You want to take it slowly so that it doesn't just shoot up. And in terms of the phenomenon where people say their stomach shrank, it's hard to know what that is. Maybe it's the ghrelin, which has gone down, but we've all done this where we've gone through a sort of extended fast and go, oh, I'm going to eat a lot. And then you eat a lot and you have this big stomach ache. And everybody's gotten that. Everybody who does fasting is like, we've all gotten that. And it quickly teaches you not to do it because your body is actually saying, no, you don't need this. I've been feeding on my own fat. Slow down. Don't take so much because I don't want to switch back so quickly to all this stuff. So it's very interesting because a lot of people will notice like, yeah, I'm so hungry after my 36-hour fast, but then I eat a little bit, I'm completely. When you look at these people who do hunger strikes and all this sort of stuff, everybody kind of says, wow, how can you do that? And again, remember, once you get past day 2, every day after that gets easier and easier because you're actually just feeding yourself body fat. If you look at 382 days, half a pound per day, half a pound of body fat per day is somewhere just less than 200 pounds, 190 pounds, which is approximately what he lost. So if you're looking to lose 180 pounds, and unfortunately there are people who need to lose that much, that's the magnitude of the sort of caloric restriction that we're talking about. You could go down to 0 for that amount of time. So it's funny because that's the world record. It was monitored by physicians. They wrote it up and so on. And it's like we went from, okay, people can survive for 382 days, and we won't even let people go 24 hours without eating before somebody starts browbeating them into stuffing a muffin into their mouth. It's hilarious. It's like, are you kidding me? One other thing I would just say in terms of when you're getting into it, there is a period of adaptation where about 2 weeks, 3 weeks when you start fasting, where there are lots of issues that come up. It's kind of like exercise. If you have never run in your life and then you ran and then your muscles are all sore, you'd be like, oh, running's the stupidest thing I've ever done. But you have to give it time. You have to get your body used to it. So your body's not used to the fasting. It's not used to shifting over to fat oxidation. So it's kind of rusty and it's not getting there. So you may get this kind of keto flu where you're just kind of, you're quite yourself. You get a bit of brain fog. You get a bit of this, get a bit of that. And what you have to understand is that happens to a lot of people. And the key is just to kind of keep doing it, keep letting your body get used to it. And then after about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you'll find that it's like nothing at all.
Yeah.
So then now, for example, I can fast 24 or 30 hours without noticing much at all. Half the time when I'm really busy, like writing the book, for example, I'm like, oh, I do tons and tons of fasting, not because I really want to lose weight, but because I just want that extra half an hour to do my work. So then there's all these different benefits that come into play when you're fasting, such as having extra time and so on. And that's terrific. It's such a good option for people. It's not a cure-all. It's not one of these miracle things. But at the same time, you got to realize it's not like the latest and greatest fad, oldest dietary intervention in the book. There's no intervention more ancient. Don't eat for a while. That's what dogs do. They get sick. They stop eating. It's kind of this natural cleansing period that people talk about.